on paper, it's the kind of matchup you want that's going to potentially help your resume, especially if you somehow go out there and beat them. That would be a big statement if Auburn could open up with a win there.
It may be the offseason, but it doesn't mean that we still can't talk about Auburn men's basketball. Usually our conversations shift around transfer portal and things of that nature, but we're going to give you something a little bit special, something that's starting to come a little bit early in the offseason. Schedule updates. And if people are familiar with E2C Network, they know I love talking about schedules and people we're adding for the upcoming season, the 2023-2024 season. And we're going to be talking about a very big time matchup to open up that season coming up right now here at E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience, whether it's about sports, our culture, or our family. It's orange and blue. It is what we do. Joining me once again for a basketball topic, familiar face here on the show and member of the Jungle podcast, Mr. Matt Donaldson, back to talk some basketball. How are you doing, sir?
Great, Kyle. Yeah, this is big news. This is worthy of a breakout video. I'm glad you're doing this.
It is. You know, no offense to the smaller teams that we schedule and announce, but this is a marquee matchup. So if you haven't heard by now, I think most people are familiar with this, but just for the purposes of getting the information right out there at the beginning of this, Auburn, to open up its 2023-24 season, will face the Baylor Bears. Not in Texas, not in Alabama, not in Chicago, not in New York, not in Florida, not in somewhere that typically people would think, oh, we're going to go to a big time market. No, folks, we are going to Sanford, not Stan, not Sam, Sanford, almost messed it up right there. Pentagon, which is also, there's interesting name there too, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota for the beginning of the season. So Matt, just initial reactions off of that headline alone.
Just like we all predicted, right? You know,
if you had South Dakota on your bingo card, you win the entire bingo for the rest of your life.
You know, Bruce said a few weeks ago, he hinted at this. I think it was maybe on one of the ambush tour stops. Yep. He kind of had a media avail. He said, you know, I think people are going to be pleased with, you know, the opponent. We're going to play somebody else that's not on our schedule yet. Like, oh, you know, and I don't know. You never know who he's referencing. They obviously couldn't release it yet. This is, you know, a huge get. I don't think we've had a opening opponent like this that I can recall in Bruce's time here. So Baylor's obviously, you know, they've won a national championship. You know, they built a really strong program there. Davion Mitchell, you know, was at Auburn, got developed at Baylor, transferred, went to the NBA. There's some connections there. There's a connection back to a NIT game when I was in school at Auburn, where we were really fighting hard to make it to New York City and lost to Baylor, which was a real bummer. So it's going to be a ranked matchup most likely. It's a great way to get exposure to start the year, and I'm thrilled. I'm really excited, and it's a great addition to an already impressive non-conference schedule that they've announced.
Yeah, there's two ways to slice up this announcement, right? It's the matchup, right? Auburn versus Baylor. Everybody's going to get excited about that on both sides of that. But I think the general basketball world sees that and goes like, oh, we got to at least, you may not watch it, but you got to at least check in on this matchup because it's Baylor. They've been a perennial power. Auburn, we're a blue blood now, of course. But, you know, most people are at least not dismissing Auburn when they hear basketball associated with this point after the Final Four run and so on and so forth, putting players in the NBA. But then there's the other piece of this. Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I was a little speechless, not to, again, dismiss the great state of South Dakota and their ability to put on a great sports event. I just had never heard of it before. And apparently Baylor had played in this exact type of role last year with someone else. Did you know that South Dakota was this place that you needed to go to kick off a basketball season?
No. Honestly, there was a bit of, you know, intrigue, I think, from a lot of people around that about the event itself and kind of where, like, I don't know if you can verify this or not, but I heard there might be some military ties to some of the things in South Dakota.
It sounds like I can't verify that, but it sounds like that would be something. Which
would make sense. You know, Bruce is big on having opportunities to get his players in situations that are kind of unique like that. And obviously it's a great matchup, but you're right. I don't know where the the Dakotas Auburn Club, if there is one up there. I'm sure they're pumped. Anybody up there in the Pacific Northwest is probably pretty excited about the potential of it. But it will be interesting. I'm sure this is going to be kind of a made-for-TV kind of event that, like you said, will really catch the attention of a lot of people.
Well, and listen, we're not expecting this to fill up like a State Farm Arena in Atlanta, like to that level, but it will fill up. You see this a lot, like over in Honolulu when they host their tournaments. It's a small arena, but they fill it up because that's becoming a thing. So we're not in any way disparaging the fact that we have to play in South Dakota. It's just a unique thing that you don't expect to talk about, much less have a matchup of this nature take place there to kick off Auburn season. We don't know officially the schedule for Auburn or Baylor yet, but it was announced that this would kick off the season at the very least for Auburn on November 7th, which is a Tuesday. It's not going to compete with any football games because it's going to be on a Tuesday. The Monday cycle of news will be even kind of closed down at that point too. So all eyes will shift to Auburn versus Baylor. And I'm just going to speak for myself, Matt. I don't know a lot about Baylor at this point. We know a little bit about Auburn and what to expect the roster and the team is going to look like. We've talked about that previously with you. Your thoughts on this matchup and what it may look like going forward?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. Two things. I love the neutral site thing. When you think about college basketball, you get to March and the SEC tournament's neutral site and you're playing neutral site the rest of the way, in the NCAA tournament. So I think any sort of exposure like that is good. And the other piece I love about this is you talk about something that can potentially you can use in preseason camp with a bunch of new faces to get people to buy it. Because, hey, you're going to be most likely on national television playing Baylor.
Yep.
The first time we get out in a real game. I'm sure there'll be an exhibition before that in Neville Arena. But, that's a good motivating factor. And I kind of like, from what I know about Bruce Pearl and his staff and the way they can motivate and the way they can push, I think that's going to be a really nice thing to have for this group that, we could sit here and we talked about, Dylan and Janai and Jalen and some of these returning guys, but there's going to be probably 5 new guys in the rotation.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to be fun to watch against a team like Baylor to roll the ball out there in the first game. But the great part about college basketball is you're not going to be punished for taking that right shot. It's good for the fans. It's good for the players. And I'm just pumped that you mentioned Baylor has really built a program in a way that Auburn has kind of tried to emulate as well as a non-traditional basketball power. Baylor's kind of had some staying power. They've been relevant for a long time.
Yes.
And I love the matchup. You're right. I don't know a ton about Baylor. We'll figure that out as we get closer to November. But on paper, it's the kind of matchup you want that's going to potentially help your resume, especially if you somehow go out there and beat them to start your year. That would really, I think that would send a message. I know it's only one game and basketball can be weird, but that would be a big statement if Auburn could open up with a win there.
No, I like the way you framed that. I like the way you talked about it, even though we can't really talk X's and O's at this very moment solidly because we're still learning about this Auburn team and we have to figure out a few things about this Baylor team too before we play them. But we can take away what the matchup does for basketball, what it does preparation-wise. It gives you that goal to work towards. And to me, I like it because it already will bring out, hopefully, a lot out of this team for Auburn early, the first game of the season and what is and isn't going to work. And some may say, well, don't you want to be polished before you get there? I mean, you could make that case, and maybe some teams are better suited that way. I don't know. There's something about this decision to start off with Baylor in a random neutral site place such as Sioux Falls, South Dakota, that just feels kind of right and special to this team. And maybe I'm just being romantic about it, but I like the way that this is shaping out. And I'm looking forward to this matchup when it arrives in the very early part of November when we're still in football season. So hopefully it won't get lost in all that.
And there's one other piece to this. I think we had Mike Burgomaster on our podcast, which was a great, awesome interview. He's an awesome guy. He's works really closely with Bruce on scheduling. He's kind of, and if you look at Auburn's success of last year's a great example. Last year's Auburn team was kind of middling, kind of struggled to, they lost a lot of close games. And the thing that, they ultimately sealed their fate with that big Tennessee win late in the year. But even if they didn't get that, they were probably going to be in because they really brilliantly non-conference scheduled. And it wasn't the big names necessarily, but Some metrics had that as a top 25 national strength of schedule non-conference out of 300 something teams. And you would look at last year and say, well, I don't know if it was that hard of a schedule. Well, and some people just want those bigger names, right?
Yes.
I think the reason you and a lot of other people are excited, you're opening with Baylor. We're playing Indiana in Atlanta.
Yep.
They're going to Brooklyn for a tournament.
Yep.
There's just a little more. It's just a little more sexy, right? There's some big names that people can really look forward to watching. So I love that part of this year's schedule. Not to mention, you mentioned Honolulu. I'm not sure if people have kind of forgotten. Not this year, but next year we're in Maui again.
Oh, I've remembered.
Which is a huge deal for Auburn basketball. Like, I don't know if people realize, not to like sidetrack our conversation, but there's just so much to look forward to over these next couple years with where the program is now at, being able to get back in Maui, being able to schedule these kind of games in the non-conference. It kind of, we're seeing some of the fruit bear out from all the hard work and the building of this program that we've seen in the last few years.
And now you all understand why I love talking about schedule updates, because not only do we talk about the immediate news, but we get to talk about the other things that kind of flow out of that. So even looking forward to a Maui Invitational a season from now, this one is going to kick off a fun and probably interesting and entertaining season for the Auburn Tigers. And I'm sure we'll be speculating and talking a lot about not just that game, but that season as time gets closer and closer. As we close out our time, Matt, I would like to give you an opportunity to share with the folks where they can find you.
Yeah, the Jungle Podcast. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram, mainly on social media. We will be pumping out a reasonable amount of content this off season. Every few weeks, checking in. We just did an episode once we finally knew who the roster was. You can check that out. A lot of reaction, looking ahead. You know, what we think about this new group with all the newcomers. There's a lot to be excited about, plenty to talk about, like you said, on the E2C network. So you can check us out on the Jungle. You can find us there, find some old interviews with some of the coaching staff and former players and all that good stuff.
Yes, definitely do check that out. If you want to follow me, you can do so on Twitter at Kyle Loomis24. And of course, follow the E2C network everywhere you can get it, on social media, podcasts, and video. It's all out there, where we share the whole Auburn experience. Thank you guys for tuning in, and War Eagle.
War Eagle.